Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, so you've sent over a really dense stack of sources on core Python essentials. We're talking functions, recursion, dictionaries, all the big ones.
Yep, and matrix multiplication too.
Right. And we know you're staring down the barrel of those practice exams and quizzes. So our mission today is pretty simple. We are going to pull out the absolute must-knows, the logic you need completely locked down to get the implementation right every time.
That's it, exactly. This isn't about just, reciting definitions. We're getting into the why choose one method over another. We're focused on efficiency and making sure your grasp of the structure is solid enough for those really tricky questions.
So we're turning theory into application.
Precisely. Let's make it count.
Okay, let's jump straight into the big one for efficiency then. Speed. When you need to find data fast, everyone points to binary search.
It's the gold standard.
But it comes with a massive catch. There's one fundamental rule, one thing you absolutely must have in place for it to even work.
And it's a strict one. The data, the list, the array, it has to be sorted.
No exceptions.
None. If it's not sorted, the whole algorithm is useless. You'd have to sort it first, which, has its own time cost, or just not use binary search at all for that task.
So why? What is it about being sorted that makes the mechanism tick?
Well, the whole power of it is in its ability to be clever. It looks at the middle value and immediately gets to throw away half the data.
Right.
It says, is my target bigger or smaller than this middle number? And because everything is in order, it knows instantly whether to look in the left half or the right half. Without that order, that comparison tells you nothing.
And that repeated halving is what gives us the efficiency gains, which the sources really hammered home when they compared it to the obvious search.
Oh, absolutely. The obvious way, just using Python's an operator or looping through, it has to check every single item one by one.
Which is fine for a small list.
For a small list, sure. But if you're searching through, say, 100,000 elements or millions of user records, that sequential checks starts to add up. You feel that delay.
And this is where it gets critical for you, the listener, because the performance numbers in the sources were just staggering. An obvious search might take a few microseconds.
Which sounds fast.
It sounds fast, but binary search on the same data was so quick, the time was basically zero.
It's the difference between what we call linear time, O of n, and logarithmic time, O of log n. And that's a concept you really have to internalize.
Give us that example again, the one with 1,024 elements.
Right. So with 1,024 items, the obvious search could, in the worst case, take 1,024 checks. Binary search will take, at most, 10.
Because 2 to the power of 10 is 1,024.
Exactly. It's a geometric reduction in work. That's why it's not just a nice-to-have. It's mandatory knowledge for performance.
Okay, let's pivot to implementation. Because the concept feels simple, but the code, that's where the traps are. First step, finding that middle index.
It's a simple formula. You take the first index, add the last index, and divide by 2. But, and this is a big but, you must use integer division.
The double slash.
Yes, the double slash in Python. Because a list index has to be a whole number. If you use a single slash, you get a float, like 5.0, and the program will crash the second you try to use that as an index. Always, always remember the double slash.
So let's talk about the loop. In an iterative version, you're usually in a while loop, and you're moving these begin and end pointers around. The update for the begin pointer seems to trip a lot of people up.
This is probably the most critical detail in the whole implementation. Let's say your target is bigger than the value at your middle index.
So you need to look at the right half.
Right. So you have to update begin. The new begin becomes mid plus 1.
And that plus 1 is everything. Why?
Because you just checked the value at mid. You know it's not your target. By moving the boundary to the index after mid, you ensure you don't check that same spot again. It prevents infinite loops and keeps it efficient. If you just set begin to mid, you might get stuck.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And that precision is a great transition to our next segment. Functions, scope, and recursion.
The logic chain.
Exactly. Let's start with the absolute basics. Functions, defined with def. The sources were really clear about the terminology here.
As they should be. This is an easy way to lose marks on a quiz. When you write def, add a, b, those variables, a and b, are parameters. They're placeholders.
And when you actually use the function...
When you call it like add 10, 12, those values, 10 and 12, are the arguments. You have to know that difference called. Parameters in the definition, arguments in the call.
Got it. Okay, next up. The thing that really separates good modular code from messy code, the difference between return and print.
Oh, this is a huge one. It's all about making your code reusable. A function is supposed to do a job and give you a result, a variable. The return keyword is what actually hands that variable back.
So other parts of the program can use it.
Yes. So another function can take that result and do more calculations with it. If you just use print, all it does is display the value on the screen. Internally, the function doesn't actually produce a usable output. It produces a none-type object.
And if a function gets a none type when it was expecting a number?
Your whole program breaks. The logic chain is snapped. You can't do math with none. So for any function that needs to feed its result into another process, you must use return. It is essential.
All right, let's talk about where that data lives. Scope, local versus global.
This is all about visibility. A variable you create inside a function is local. It's born in that function, and it dies when the function ends. You can't see it or use it from outside.
And if you try, you get a name error.
Correct. A global variable is one defined outside of any function, at the top level of your script. It's visible everywhere. Any function can read it.
But there's a keyword to sort of break that wall down, right?
There is, the global keyword. If you're inside a function and you need to change a global variable, you have to declare it first, like global myVariable. It tells Python, hey, the variable I'm about to change is the one from the outside world, not a new local one.
But you should use it sparingly.
Very sparingly. It can make code hard to debug. But for an exam, you absolutely have to know how it works.
Which brings us to the concept that ties all this together in a sometimes confusing way. Recursion.
The function that calls itself.
Yeah. What's the main point of using it?
Recursion is really elegant for solving big problems that are made up of smaller, identical subproblems. Think of calculating a factorial or compound interest. You solve the big problem by first solving the smallest version of it.
But there is a golden rule. The number one thing you must have or everything explodes.
The base condition. This is your escape hatch. It's the condition that tells the function, okay, stop calling yourself now.
And if you don't have one?
You get an infinite loop. The function calls itself over and over, eating up memory until the system just gives up and you get a Stack Overflow error. It's the first thing an examiner looks for in your recursive code. Do you have a valid base condition?
The sources use compound interest as a great example.
It's a perfect one because it shows the logic working backward. Instead of starting at year 1, the function call starts at, say, year 3. It then calls itself for year 2, which calls itself for year 1.
And year 1 is the base condition.
Exactly. Once it solves for year 1, it passes that result back up to the year 2 call, which calculates its result and passes it back to year 3. It builds the answer back up from the simplest case.
So we also saw a recursion applied to binary search. And the sources said this recursive version is actually better, more optimized. Why?
It comes down to one thing: avoiding the creation of new objects.
Meaning you're not slicing the list.
Precisely. In a naive version, you might actually chop the list in half and pass that smaller list to the next function call. But creating new lists over and over is computationally expensive. It takes time and memory.
So what does the recursive version do instead?
It's much smarter. It never changes the original list. It just passes the updated index boundaries, the new begin and end values, to the next call. It's saying, keep searching the same big list, but only look between this index and that index. It's incredibly efficient.
That is a fantastic point. Okay, segment 3, data structures. Let's talk about dictionaries. They're basically the solution to the slow search problem in lists, right?
They are. If you have a massive data set, billions of values, and you just need to check if something exists, a list is terrible. A dictionary, on the other hand, gives you direct access. The lookup is nearly instantaneous.
So structurally, how are they different?
Well, a list is an ordered sequence. You get to items with numerical index, 0, 1, 2. A dictionary is an unordered collection of key-value pairs.
So you don't use numbers to find things.
Not unless the key itself is a number. You use the key. And the keys have to be unique and immutable, so strings, numbers, floats. But, and this is a key constraint, you cannot use a list or another dictionary as a key.
So to get a value, you use the key name in square brackets, like dname.
Exactly. And this gets interesting when you have nested structures. You might have a dictionary where the value is a list.
Like a user's name is the key, and a list of their scores is the value.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
To get the third score, you'd have to do a two-step access. First, the dictionary key, do your name, and then the list index 2. You have to chain the access methods together.
And what are the main methods for getting data out of a dictionary?
The big 3 are D keys, D values, and D items. Keys and values do what they say on the tin, but D items is the one you'll use most for looping. It gives you back a list of tuples, and each tuple is a key value pair. Very, very useful.
Okay, let's tackle our final topic, The one that can look really intimidating, matrix multiplication.
The three-loop problem.
Yes. In Python, a matrix is usually a list of lists, but the math behind multiplying them is complex to code.
It is, because you're really just doing a whole series of dot products. That's the core operation. And before you even start, you have to check two things. First, the matrices have to be compatible columns. In the first must equal rows in the second.
And second.
You have to create your result matrix, matrix C, as a grid of zeros with the correct final dimensions. You need that placeholder to put your results into.
All right, let's walk through the three nested loops. What is the job of the outermost loop? Let's say it uses I.
The I loop's only job is to fix the row of the first matrix, matrix A. For each full run of the I loop, you are calculating one full row of your final answer matrix.
Then the second loop, with J.
The J loop fixes the column of the second matrix, matrix B. So now, with I and J fixed, you've pinpointed a single cell in your answer matrix. C. Your goal is now to calculate the value for just that one spot.
And that's the job of the third innermost loop, the one that actually does the math.
Exactly. Let's call its iterator K. This K loop is what performs the dot product. It moves along the row I of matrix A and simultaneously down the column J of matrix B.
Multiplying the corresponding elements.
Right. It calculates A times BKJ and adds that to a running sum. When the K loop finishes, that sum is the final value for C. Then the J loop ticks over, and you do it all again for the next column.
Wow. Okay, this has been an incredibly focused review. We've hit the speed of binary search, the importance of return-in functions, the absolute necessity of a base condition in recursion, and we just deconstructed those three loops for matrix multiplication.
And as you go into your final review, my advice is to practice. Don't just read about it. Write a recursive binary search. Code the matrix multiplication loops. Pay attention to those little details like mid plus 1, because that's where the points are won or lost. Mastering the structure and constraints of these tools is everything.
That brings us to our final thought. A little something for you to chew on. We saw that the recursive binary search is faster because it avoids creating new list objects. It just passes indices. Now, if creating objects is that expensive, how could you apply that same principle using indices to represent changes instead of actually changing the data to optimize something notoriously slow, like an obvious sort algorithm? How could you avoid all that costly data shuffling? We'll leave you with that.